Welcome, everybody, to this session of Views on the Future, What's Ahead, brought to you by Women in Drones. I'm your host, Bill Johnson, and with me today is Rob Oldroyd, who is a risk advisor with Moreton Company, a professor of aviation insurance and corporate management for the Utah Valley University, and an advisor to Women in Drones. Rob, thanks for making it today. I really appreciate it. I think you're going to give us some really interesting insights. But to start off, why don't you give us a little bit of your background, how you got here, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Bill. Well, thank you, first off, and thanks to Women in Drones. I'm excited to be here. As you mentioned, I've had a history in aviation. I studied aviation in school, hoping to find a way into it. I worked at JetBlue for a little while as an analyst, and then ultimately started teaching at Utah Valley University and started my career at Moreton Company, doing aviation insurance, among other things.
Well, that's cool. And a lot of people would think, and we've had this discussion already, that aviation insurance can be kind of dry. It's a lot about statistics, and a lot about, tables but risk management and the ability to actually look at the risk and sort of put it into a monetary position. How much, do you have to pay in case something goes wrong, right? Isn't that kind of what risk management's about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say I totally agree with the sentiment that many people have about insurance not being something interesting or something fun. I felt the same way until I started studying it and really getting into it. And I'd say that risk management, I made a career out of it because it really can be interesting. I think it is interesting if it's approached the right way. So yeah, there's a lot to say. I think that as we do get into the how and why of risk management, and as it really applies to a business personally, it is very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think most businesses would find that as they really delve into their own risk management for their own purposes, I think it's a very exciting part of their business.
Well, and it's also a very important part of their business, right? I mean, a business can go away very quickly if they don't have the insurance and they have to, find the money to cover any sort of losses or any liability that they engender through it. And in the aviation world, there's a big, there's the opportunity or the chance that you could have a huge liability because of the area that that the vehicles, et cetera, are working in. So let's kick it off then. As the title suggests, I'm going to try to talk to you about the near term and the far term, but in the sense of how that affects the insurance industry and your job as a risk manager and an understanding of the risk. And so the first one that I have for you is, in the near term, how difficult will be for the AEM or drone industry to actually get insurance, and exactly why might it be hard?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I think if we can kind of take the example of drones and AAM, separate them a little bit.
Okay.
Drones are relatively new. I know there's been some level of unmanned flight for a very long time, but really their widespread use is a fairly new phenomenon. And at very first, when the first drone was flying, the cost to insure it was astronomical because there were so many unknowns. And underwriters, of which I am not, but the people who actually underwrite risk and determine pricing, hate unknowns. And so drones not that long ago were a complete unknown, and it was, who knows what can happen, what can go wrong, what if these things fly away, what if these things hit commercial aircraft, like what could go wrong, and the possibilities were limitless, and I guess to some extent they still are. However, as more data came out, as more drones hit the hit the air, so to speak, the data has proven very favorable for drones, and the pricing on drone insurance is relatively low. It's definitely low compared to manned aviation because
Really?
the data is favorable.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. Is that
Yeah,
because of the size of the drones, the impact that they could have?
that's a good question. Size is certainly a factor. The bigger and heavier something is, the more likely it is to cause significant damage. But a lot of it is really just the safety. I think
That's neat.
underwriters maybe thought initially, hey, people are gonna be flying these things without their own body at risk. They may be somewhat cavalier, somewhat careless with their flying habits, and that has not been the case. The under 55-pound drones have been extremely safe, and there's relatively few examples of incidents that you can point to say, well, this was a big issue relative to manned aviation. So the data has supported unmanned aviation thus far. However, right, and kind of switching into that other category, advanced air mobility is sort of a new unknown, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the very short term, despite some of the lessons learned and some of the aspects that we can borrow from the drone experience and from manned aviation, AAM is still new, right? And so I think that initially it's going to be challenging to insure. It may be relatively expensive to insure due to the lack of data. But I foresee that changing, right? I think everyone knows that safety is paramount to the reputation of the industry. And as such, as that data grows, I foresee the insurance markets rallying a bit more behind it and ultimately coming to a reasonable balance on
Is
price.
there an impact from the FAA regulation requirements? Because they have a they are certifying the safe aspect of the operation of that vehicle, or the person that's licensed, either a drone operator that gets licensed under 107, or the operators that are flying the aircraft that are new.
Yeah.
Does that help the insurance industry?
It does to an extent. Regulation's great. I guess from the perspective of those who are putting money on the line, right? Regulation's great. It does create some level of stability and safety. However, I would draw parallels to other industries as maybe an example. For example, trucking is extremely regulated, and there's still a lot of bad things that happen, and there's a lot of costs associated with that type of insurance. And so while the FAA has a lot of good safety regulations, aviation itself is highly regulated.
Mm-hmm.
We still see, I mean, if anyone has any exposure to manned aviation, helicopter rates are nuts. It's very difficult to procure helicopter insurance right now. It's very expensive. Fixed wing is the same way, maybe not to the same level, but those are just as regulated, right?
Right.
And yet
Yeah.
data is still ultimately what the underwriters are going to look at.
So
I don't
that's
think that
perfect. That kind of leads into the next question of we've
good.
let's keep the parallel between the trucking industry and the aviation industry. It's really
Sure.
interesting that you bring that up, but
Yeah.
let's look then further out as the drone industry, as the advanced air mobility industry continues on. Let's say 5 or 10 years from now, it's going to gather more data. Do you think that will how will that affect the way the industry offers products, offers insurance? Will it be less exorbitant? Will it be more uh, more even as far as the amounts, that type of stuff? What do you think will be the impact of having more information, more data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm an optimist, so I'll give you that caveat. But I see, on the ground floor with those operating unmanned aircraft, there's an extreme sense of safety, right? And that we need to operate
Yep.
within limits. One careless act can really hurt the reputation of a budding industry like this. So first off, I think that that's in our favor. I think that the data that does come out will continue to be favorable. I feel the same way about advanced air mobility. There's a very serious approach to it. So I think that is in the favor of the data. And second, like with drones, I foresee many more uses for drones. They've sure blown up in the last few years. There's more and more uses and creative ways of getting them out there. So that increases the amount of data. I foresee that trend continuing, more and more drones up in the air, again, with good data. And I see the same with advanced air mobility. I think that at first it'll be novel and exciting, and everyone's trying to show off their big machines, which will be difficult for insurers to get behind. However, as it becomes more commonplace and as the records continue to be very positive, I foresee the pricing being relatively competitive in the future.
Yeah, that really, I think there's an economic incentive to the OEMs to make their vehicles as safe as possible through insurance premiums and trying to bring that down and make it, less costly. So,
yeah.
All right, Rob, thanks for doing this quick hitting interview. I really appreciate it. It's actually a fascinating subject that I think we could have a much longer conversation on, but that'll be all for today. Thanks again for joining me.
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And thanks, Women in Drones. I'm excited to be a part of this and looking forward to the future.
Okay. Well, that's it, everyone, for this session of Views on the Future, What's Ahead.
No, it's fine. So I don't know if I told you, I had my family in St. George, Utah.